Chapter 8. The hallway was chaos. Asher, Mallory, Harper, Lachlan, Jade, and Elias pushed through the entrance of the university's main building, only to be nearly knocked over by a stampede of students and faculty surging in the opposite direction. Shouts echoed down the corridor. Panic painted every face. Mallory grabbed Harper's arm to steady herself. "What the hell? Get out. Just get out," a professor cried as he passed, wild-eyed and pale. Another clutched a clipboard and muttered incoherently about a fire. But it wasn't just fire they were running from. The students were yelling louder, shriller. "It's haunted. Something's in there. I saw it. I swear I saw it, like a shadow but alive. It's a ghost." The six of them froze as they reached the seminar wing. Ahead, the heavy oak door to one of the classrooms stood half open, its hinges groaning in the sudden hush that followed the crowd's retreat. No one else was approaching it. It was that room, the one the whispers mentioned, the one that had emptied the building. Harper looked toward the door, then at the others. "That's the room. That's where it started." Elias moved forward a step but didn't get closer to the door. His jaw was tight, fists clenched at his sides. Something happened in there. Lachlan's voice was low. "Think it's the book? The one that vanished from the forbidden archives." "Maybe someone found it," Jade said, her arms wrapped around herself. "Maybe they opened it. Read from it. Or maybe there's no book at all," Mallory murmured, her voice steady but laced with dread. "Maybe something else was waiting, watching. And now it's free." A cold draft swept down the hall, unnatural and sharp, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and something fouler, wet earth and iron. The lights above them flickered. Harper swallowed hard. "We're really going in there, aren't we?" Asher nodded slowly. "Whatever's behind that door, we can't ignore it." They stood together, six bodies braced against a tide of fear, facing the one place no one dared to enter. From underneath the door, its shadows pooling like ink on the polished floor. Beyond it, the unknown waited, unseen, unheard, and deeply felt. Asher took a step forward and turned to face the others. His expression was tight, his voice calm but resolute. "You guys don't have to do this," he said. "I'll go in alone." The words hung in the air, stark against the lingering tension. "If something happens, I'll be the only one at risk. I won't drag you all into danger." Mallory stepped forward without hesitation, her brows drawn in a fierce scowl. "No, Asher. I'm not letting you go in alone." Her voice trembled just slightly, betraying the fear beneath her defiance. "What if something happens and I'm not there to make sure you're okay?" He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could, Lachlan raised a hand with a half-hearted groan. "I can't believe I'm still in my pajamas," he muttered. "And barefoot." He glanced down at his striped shirt with a grimace. "If I get murdered by a demon, it's gonna be while wearing stripes." Harper stifled a shaky laugh, arms crossed tightly as though trying to hold herself together. Jade looked from one face to the next, her hands fluttering nervously at her sides. "Are we actually doing this?" she asked, her voice thin. "Because my fight-or-flight response is mostly flight." Harper added, "I want to help, but I also really enjoy living." Elias gave a long sigh, running a hand through his hair. "My survival plan was eating instant noodles and finishing my degree quietly." He looked toward the half-open door like it personally offended him. "Not chasing ancient curses before my 10 a.m. lecture." Despite the tension, a flicker of camaraderie passed between them all. Asher's gaze swept across the group, his posture softening. "You all showed up," he said quietly. "That means more than you know. Even if you didn't have to." Asher, Mallory, Harper, Lachlan, Elias, and Jade stood in a tense line outside the seminar classroom. Not one of them spoke. Not one dared to move. A cold draft whispered down the corridor, brushing their skin like ghost fingers and sending a collective shiver through their spines. Somewhere deeper in the building, a scream echoed, distant, distorted, and full of terror. They exchanged uneasy glances and, together, drew a breath. A slow, unified inhale, as if trying to steel their nerves before stepping off a cliff. Asher turned to the door, his face tight with dread. His hand lifted, just slightly trembling, as he reached for the handle. Is the rune book inside? Was it used, unleashed? Or is something even worse waiting for them on the other side? Click. The latch gave way. The door creaked open. The world on the other side of the threshold was not the classroom they remembered. They stood frozen in the doorway, a sharp intake of breath passing through each of them, 6 shocked gasps piercing the heavy silence like blades through mist. The seminar room had been transformed into something nightmarish. Chairs lay toppled, legs broken like shattered limbs. Desks were overturned, their contents strewn across the floor in chaotic spirals. Loose papers fluttered in the air, twisting and swirling as if caught in the breath of something invisible, something not quite alive, but not entirely dead. In the center of the room pulsed a deep, throbbing red glow. It radiated from a single object, the book. It lay open on the floor, its yellowed pages twitching and rustling despite the still air. A low hum seemed to throb from its spine like a heartbeat, primal and wrong. From the ceiling, a viscous black liquid dripped, fat, sticky globs falling in rhythmic intervals. They hit the floor with soft, wet sounds, spreading like ink. Trails of it ran down the walls, thin and branching like blood vessels etched in shadow. On the whiteboard, ghostly handprints flashed in and out of existence. Glowing, clawed impressions that faded, returned, and moved with a will of their own. And then they saw them. 2 figures. At the far end of the cursed classroom, the shadows deepened. One figure hovered just above the ground. Her arms were outstretched, like a crucified soul suspended in silent torment. Her head hung at an unnatural angle, long black hair cascading over her face like a curtain soaked in ink. What little could be seen of her features flickered, translucent, fractured, shifting between anguish and fury. Her form was not bound to the rules of flesh or time. She shimmered like a phantom barely tethered to reality, a woman carved from grief and fire. Ageless, agonized, alive. And she wasn't alone. The second creature was something else entirely. It lumbered across the room, massive and hunched, draped in garments from another century, now soaked in dark, crusted blood. Its skin was mottled gray, stretched tight across muscle and bone, its face nothing more than a blank, formless slab. No eyes, no mouth. Yet somehow it searched. It moved blindly, bumping into overturned desks and chairs with twitching, jerking arms, sensing something. Someone. Harper's breath hitched. Jade's hand flew to her mouth. No one dared to speak. But there near the pulsing red glow, they saw it. The book. Still open. Still humming. Still oozing the power that had poisoned this place. This was their moment. Their only chance. But how could they reach it without being seen? One wrong step. One uneven breath. One heartbeat too loud. And those figures would know. Asher stepped forward. Silently. Deliberately. He moved like a shadow along the edge of the room, each step placed with practiced care. His breath was shallow, his eyes locked on the cursed object. A whisper of movement. Then another. The ghostly woman did not stir. The faceless brute twitched but didn't turn. Asher knelt, reaching carefully toward the book, its power pulsing beneath his fingers like a living heart. Touch it and die, a voice seemed to hiss in the back of his mind. But he ignored it. With one swift motion, he scooped the book into his arms. The pulse stilled. The air turned electric. Now, he surged to his feet and bolted for the door. Behind him, the room woke up. The faceless creature jerked toward the sound, arms flailing with eerie precision. Its head snapped unnaturally in Asher's direction, and it began to move, slow at first, then faster, its heavy limbs scraping against the floor in a grotesque pursuit. A screech filled the air, inhuman and raw. The others screamed. Then Asher and his friends suddenly raced for the university's exit. Chapter 9. They didn't stop running until the looming silence returned. Down stairwells, across empty quads, past panicked professors barking vague orders and security guards shouting to stay inside your dorms. None of it registered. Not fully. Not after what they saw. By the time they reached the third floor of the dorms, their bodies were failing them. Asher leaned against the wall inside Mallory's room, drenched in sweat, his chest heaving. He clutched the rune book tightly to his ribs, knuckles white. Mallory stood just behind him, bent forward slightly, one hand gripping her side as a cramp seized her ribs. Her other hand trembled at her side. Her eyes didn't leave Asher, not for a second. Inside the dorm, the others collapsed into the cramped space like the aftermath of a battle. Harper stumbled to the bed, dropping onto it with a strangled breath, one hand on her chest, the other shaking as she pulled her knees to her chest. She didn't speak. Lachlan leaned against the desk, his back sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his hair plastered to his forehead, his striped pajama shirt soaked in sweat. His breathing was shallow and fast. Jade doubled over near the windowsill, one hand braced on the frame, her face pale. She hadn't cried. Not yet. But the way her shoulders trembled, the way she refused to meet anyone's eyes, it was only a matter of time. Elias lingered near the door, his back against it as though physically holding the world out. His eyes were wild and unfocused, the weight of the book's secrets dragging heavy on his mind even without ever touching it. The room was still, breathless. Outside, through the narrow dorm window, the world continued with uncomfortable normalcy. Sirens wailed in the distance. A security cart buzzed past. Somewhere down the hall, someone was laughing, oblivious or in denial. Inside, time felt broken. Professors had already begun spinning the story. An intruder, they claimed. Smoke from faulty electrics. Some incident being handled. But none of the 6 believed it. They'd seen what truly lived inside that room. And it wasn't electrical. It was ancient. Wrong. Jade drew in a shaky breath. Lachlan was the first to speak. "My feet are killing me," he muttered. "I'm going to have blisters the size of golf balls from running barefoot." Lachlan said nothing in response to his own quip. His worried eyes flicked between his friends, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him they were going to be okay. Instead, Harper exploded. "It's a miracle we're even alive, Lachlan," she snapped, her arms tightly crossed over her chest, voice sharp with fear masked as anger. "Never mind your blisters. Those things could have torn us apart the second Asher touched that book." She looked away after saying it, jaw clenched, blinking too fast. The room tensed again. Mallory shifted, stepping closer to Asher but keeping her eyes on the cursed tome still clutched in his hands. "If that book caused that horror show in the seminar room," she said quietly, "are we even safe keeping it here?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but the question hung heavy in the air. Elias, from his place against the door, rubbed the back of his neck and offered, "Maybe it's not the book itself. Maybe some random student found it, thought it was just some edgy old relic, and messed with it. Like a joke that went too far." "I think so too," Asher murmured, his voice hollow. "Yeah," Jade added softly. "It's probably harmless on its own. I think." Lachlan barked a bitter laugh. "You think isn't exactly comforting when the walls were bleeding and a ghost nearly ate us." Yeah, true, Harper said, her tone dry. Forgive me if I'm not exactly ready to cuddle up with that evil spellbook just yet. Silence again. Then Jade broke it. Okay, so what do we do now? Any plans? Or are we just hoping this thing doesn't wake up in the middle of the night and strangle us? Everyone turned to Asher, almost involuntarily. He seemed to carry the book and the burden. He took a breath. Remember when Mallory and I met up with Professor Rivera? Mallory nodded solemnly. She's the university's top researcher on ancient texts and mystical artifacts, Asher explained. We asked her about the legend, the one about the hidden book, the cursed halls. She told us if we ever did find the book, we should contact her immediately. She wants to study it, he continued. See if there's a way to decipher it. Maybe even figure out how to break whatever curse is attached to it. I vote yes for getting rid of this cursed thing, SCP, Harper said, raising her hand like they were still in class. Her voice was light, but her eyes weren't joking. Jade stood with her arms crossed, still visibly shaken. Elias spoke up beside her. If anyone can figure out what's going on, it's Professor Rivera. Asher remained quiet, but Mallory stepped forward, calm and composed despite the shadows still clinging to her expression. Then let's contact her, she said. The sooner we understand what this book is, the better. She glanced at the others, her voice firming. And we should sleep in pairs again tonight, like we did last night. But this time we take turns sleeping. One of us stays awake for a couple of hours while the other rests, then switch. A silence passed through the room, heavy with quiet agreement. Just in case, she added. If those figures return, or if someone disappears again like Lachlan did, we'll have someone keeping watch. Mallory's eyes flicked to the book, still wrapped in a spare towel on her desk like a dormant bomb. Asher and I will keep the rune book here in my dorm and watch it overnight. See if it reacts, or does anything on its own. Then, with a shaky sigh, she finished. Let's hope we all survive the night. Hopefully by morning, Professor Rivera will have replied. Asher turned to Lachlan, who was still favoring his sore foot. You can borrow my slippers if it helps, he said. You'll need them to hobble over to Harper's dorm room. Lachlan gave a weary chuckle. Thanks, bro. You're a real one. Harper was already pulling him toward the door. Come on, Footloose. Let's get you to base camp. Elias leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, his brow furrowed with lingering dread. But what if Professor Rivera opens the book and disappears in a puff of smoke? No one laughed. Jade, seated nearby with her legs tucked up, gave a dry, tired shrug. Then we're cursed, doomed, and probably expelled, she said flatly. Not in that order. Lachlan rubbed his temple and gave a nonchalant shrug. Honestly, if this book gets us out of lectures and exams forever, it might be worth it. Harper shot him a look. Lachlan, the book literally summoned a ghost woman and a faceless corpse. He blinked. Right. Yeah. Bad idea. Forget I said anything. Then, more quietly, I was only kidding. He folded his arms and tried to look like he hadn't just been internally negotiating with the dark powers of truancy. Harper rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath. Back on the other side of the room, Elias stared down at the floor, his voice low with hope and desperation. I just hope she opens the email, looks at the book, says, "Oh yes, this is totally solvable," and then magically fixes everything. Jade scoffed softly. Because that's totally how cursed demonic artifacts work. Elias let out a long, quiet sigh. They all sat with that thought for a moment, wishing it could be that simple. The following afternoon, a soft chime echoed from Mallory's phone. Professor Rivera had replied. She agreed to examine the rune-covered book, offering to decipher what she could, to investigate the whispers of a centuries-old curse. Perhaps she could uncover the truth behind it. Perhaps, if they were lucky, she might find a way to end it. Not long after, The university issued an official announcement to all students. The campus would be closed for the next several days. Classes were to resume virtually through the university's hub app. The administration claimed it was a precaution in response to a mass water leakage issue. No mention of screaming halls. No mention of spectral apparitions or pulsing red light. Meanwhile, deep beneath the university grounds, Mallory, Asher, Jade, Elias, Lachlan, and Harper found themselves descending once more into the crypt-like space they'd hoped never to revisit. Not a soul accompanied them. Not even the wind stirred down here. This hidden place, its stone walls tight and sweating, seemed to pulse with secrets. The shadows clung to the corners, stretching like claws across the floor, as though they had been waiting for their return. The silence was oppressive. The air hung heavy, clinging to their skin like damp fog. It reeked of mildew, of old yellowing paper, and something fouler that twisted the stomach. Dread, Harper thought. That's what the air smelled like. Whatever happened here, whatever started in this place, it hadn't ended. Now, the six of them stood in tense silence, backs straight, arms crossed or twitching, eyes flicking toward the dark corners. Waiting. Professor Rivera was coming. And with her, maybe answers. Or maybe something worse. Footsteps echoed off the cold stone floor. Professor Rivera emerged from the shadows at the far end of the chamber, her silhouette tall and composed despite the eerie weight of the space. She walked with purpose, eyes sharp behind her glasses as she approached the group. Slung under one arm was her leather satchel, cradled in her gloved hands, the ancient book with runes. Without a word, she opened the tome and began flipping through the delicate, time-worn pages. Her fingers were careful, reverent, but her eyes moved quickly, scanning line after line as if chasing down a thought that refused to stay still. The six students stood silently around her, watching, barely daring to breathe. The stillness that settled over them wasn't just from respect. It was anticipation, tension, fear. The air had thickened again, heavy with the weight of whatever knowledge was about to be uncovered. Professor Rivera's voice finally broke the silence. "These runes," she murmured, eyes still locked on the parchment. "I'm afraid I can't decipher them fully. They're incredibly archaic, almost pre-human script in nature." A chill passed through the group at those words. "But," she continued, more focused now, "there are pictograms, fragments of language embedded in the margins." Her brow furrowed slightly as she traced one long, angular symbol with her index finger. "It appears to recount the story of a student. A girl who once attended this very university, centuries ago." She looked up briefly, her expression unreadable. She was accused of practicing witchcraft. Executed. The words fell like stones in a still pond. "But what's strange," Rivera added, flipping another page with a whisper of parchment, "is that the book wasn't confiscated. It was hidden." She turned the tome slightly toward the group, revealing a sketch, crude but poignant, of two figures pressed together in a final embrace. It seems her lover, possibly another student, kept it, hid it, protected it from the authorities. She glanced at Mallory and Asher, then at the others, her voice lowering to something almost reverent. The pages of the book rustled softly as Professor Rivera paused, her fingertips still resting on the brittle parchment. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. This book wasn't just a record of spells or rituals, she realized silently. It was a keepsake, a legacy, a secret, sacred inheritance, passed down through hidden hands in the forgotten corners of the university. It had waited, cloaked in shadow and time, quietly biding its moment. And now it was awake. Asher took a cautious step forward. "Is there anything in the book that tells us who created the curse?" he asked. "Or how we can break it?" Rivera nodded slowly, rubbing her chin. "That's exactly what I was about to search for," she murmured. There's a passage here that might explain. The room changed in an instant. A strange sound, like metal scraping against stone, filled the air, followed by a flicker of unnatural light. Out of nowhere, a crimson glow bled from the edges of the book. Not a soft shimmer, but a pulsing, angry heartbeat of red light that lit up the entire crypt. The pages themselves seemed to shift, their symbols warping and crawling like insects under glass. Professor Rivera reeled back in alarm, clutching the book tightly. Mallory screamed. Asher gasped. From the corners of the chamber, colored light spilled in jagged flashes like lightning trapped in stained glass. The ground beneath their feet vibrated with a low mechanical hum, as though the crypt were coming alive. Jade let out a horrified cry, while Elias stood frozen in awe, eyes wide and disbelieving. Harper clutched her chest as if trying to keep her soul from leaping free. Lachlan, utterly pale, could only stare in mute terror. Professor Rivera looked up, panic finally creeping into her usually steady voice. Something's wrong. I didn't activate anything. And then, it happened. A searing white light erupted from the book, blinding and immediate. The light wasn't just bright. It was hot, like the sun had been born between the pages. The chamber was swallowed in radiance. The group barely had time to react. Mallory recoiled, her eyes squeezed shut. Asher shielded his face with both arms. Rivera gasped, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of magic erupting from the ancient tome. Then, nothing. The light vanished, and with it, all sound. Darkness fell like a curtain, absolute and final. They appeared to the sound of rushing water and the sharp bite of cold wind. Mallory's scream pierced the air as she jolted upright. Asher stumbled back, gasping for breath like he'd just surfaced from drowning. Around them, the others reacted the same. Jade, Elias, Harper, and Lachlan, each disoriented, each terrified, their eyes darting around in panic. They were no longer in the crypt. Above them, a slate-colored sky churned with clouds that glowed faintly with unnatural hues, purples and greens that pulsed like veins under diseased skin. Around them stood jagged cliffs of dark, weeping stone, and in the distance, a massive waterfall roared, its crimson-tinged waters plunging into a gorge that seemed to stretch down into nothingness. They weren't anywhere near the university anymore. They weren't anywhere near Earth. The air here was too still, too heavy. It pressed against their skin and lungs like invisible hands. The only sound was the distant crashing of the waterfall and a strange echo, like whispers bouncing off the walls of reality. They had been transported. Somewhere else. Mallory stumbled backward, her boots crunching on blackened leaves, her breath ragged. Asher stepped beside her, equally shaken, scanning their surroundings with wide eyes. Harper spun in place. "Where are we?" she shouted, voice swallowed almost instantly by the open space. It bounced off the cliffs and came back to her, thinner, warped. Asher's face was pale. "And where's Professor Rivera?" No one answered. The group stood in uneasy silence, as if waiting for the world to shift again. And then, footsteps. They came from behind them. Slow, deliberate. From the mists at the edge of the overlook, a figure emerged. At first glance, it looked like Rivera, same stature, same face. But something was wrong. Her skin seemed too smooth, too perfect, like porcelain stretched over bone. Her eyes glowed faintly gold, like fireflies behind frosted glass. Her lips were twisted into a smile that held no kindness. "I finally got you kids where I want you," she hissed, her voice a sharp contrast to her usual calm tone. Asher recoiled in horror. "What the hell?" Mallory's stomach dropped. "No," she whispered, barely able to speak. "No, no, no." Across the overlook, Jade froze mid-step. Elias's mouth fell open. Harper clutched her chest. Lachlan stumbled backward like he might fall off the edge. The woman took a step closer. Mallory's voice trembled, her hands rising defensively. Professor Rivera has been the evil sorcerer this whole time? The figure laughed. Not a chuckle, not a giggle. A full delighted cackle that sent a ripple of dread through the group. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the smooth black stone as she surveyed them with smug amusement. Her eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, golden and cold, and her voice curled like smoke as she spoke. Not quite, obnoxiously nosy child, she sneered, fixing her gaze on Mallory. The air grew colder. Professor Rivera, the woman said mockingly, crossing her arms, was foolish enough to be drawn to this cursed university, pulled in by its oh-so-spooky urban legend. The whispers, the mystery, the death. She smirked, a cruel tilt of her lips. So I thought, why not use her? She was perfect, curious, brave, eager to help. The perfect vessel. The words hit like ice water. Mallory's stomach twisted. Asher swore under his breath. Harper stepped backward, instinctively moving closer to Elias. The witch's smile widened, feral now. Now, she said, her voice silken and full of venom. Rivera is as good as dead. She threw her head back and sang a high dramatic note, mocking, theatrical, and then broke into laughter again, louder this time, feeding on their terror. And then silence. She lowered her voice to a low snarl. But enough of this. The air around her thickened, pulsing with magic. The sky behind her seemed to darken. Every 100 years, she said, voice low and bitter, some pathetic students just like you start poking around. Right on cue. Every damn time. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. They always think they're uncovering something important. That they're special. Jade flinched. Lachlan clenched his fists. Elias remained frozen, eyes wide. And I always bring them here, the witch snarled, to end their pitiful little lives. She raised her arms, wind stirring around her, rippling her robes like wings. And now, her voice echoed across the cliffs. You will face the same fate. She stood there, arms poised, dark power radiating from her like heat from a fire, ready to strike. And the students, they had seconds to react. Time stilled. The night didn't move. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A chill, far deeper than fear, slithered beneath their skin, icy, ancient, inescapable. It wrapped around their hearts like cold iron chains. The group stood scattered across the cliffside clearing, each frozen in dread. Asher's shoulders sank as he stared at the ground, unable to lift his eyes. Lachlan's face was pale, his hands limp at his sides. Jade and Elias barely breathed, every nerve straining as if the very air might shatter them. Mallory choked on a sob, her whole body trembling. Harper clutched her arms tight across her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks as she blinked hard against the horror before them. The witch's presence loomed like a storm cloud, and above it all, the sky remained horribly, unnaturally still. This wasn't myth. This wasn't a warning carved in stone or whispered in library corners. This was death, and it was standing right in front of them. There was nowhere left to run. A sudden sound cracked through the tension like a thunderclap, a hum, low at first, then rising, vibrating the earth, the trees, the marrow in their bones. A flash of blue light sparked in the distance. A glowing orb, small, perfect, and impossibly bright, hovered just above the ground, spinning silently in the shadows behind the witch, and then it shoved her. She faltered. Her eyes flicked toward it, narrowing with suspicion. Who is wielding magic? She snarled, her voice sharp as broken glass. The orb flared brighter, shooting across the space like a comet. The witch took a step back, face contorting in fury. "There should be no one able to wield magic here apart from me," she shrieked. "I made sure of it." Her voice cracked with fury, her magic trembling in the air like a shattered mirror. "It can't be." And then, the orb exploded in a sudden burst of light. A roar of unseen energy surged through the clearing, a wave of power no one could explain, ancient, raw, and blinding. The witch's scream was cut short, and in a blinding white flash, she was gone. Silence fell, thick and crushing. Only the lingering scent of scorched magic remained. The cliffside was quiet again, but the fear she left behind clung to the air like smoke. They were still alive, but nothing felt safe anymore.